Hi everyone, welcome back to the Nature Patch. My name is Robyn and thank you for joining in on another video. Today I am going to be doing a video on all about how to tell if your garden is healthy or not. Usually about once a week I will do a good walk around the garden, and there's a few specific things that I look for to see if everything's healthy or not. And today I'm going to be running through what these are. They're really simple things that you can look out for in the garden that don't really take a lot of time to check around the garden, and it definitely pays off in the long run to make sure that everything's going well and how it should be in the garden for your plants to flourish. So I've got 7 points on my list, so let's get into it. So one of the first things that I like to do pretty much every day when I'm watering my plants is to check the moisture levels in the soil. This is really important because plants generally need a regular amount of water, but there is a fine line between regular watering and too much water. Overwatering can cause your plants often to yellow in their leaves and can really affect the overall crop that you have planted. It all takes time and trial and error to understand how much water each plant actually needs. And as gardeners, we should be very familiar with failure and trial and error because it's often really hard to grow plants successfully. So one of the ways you can test whether your soil is too wet or too dry is simply by just sticking your finger in the soil and seeing how moist it is. If it comes out kind of just with a bit of soil on your fingers, that's generally pretty good. And this is something that you can keep an eye on each day. Obviously, depending on the weather, some days your plant's going to have more moisture in the soil and some days less as well. Overwatering can cause a few different problems and challenges, and one of which that I found out this week was that my garlic was super affected by overwatering. So I'll go and show you what that looks like right now. All right, so I'm down in one of my garlic patches and you can kind of see beside me, I'll put an overlay on the screen as well, a lot of the garlics have kind of flopped over and aren't standing upright like some of the other garlic are in a different area of the garden. So this can happen a few different ways, one of which is overwatering. And again, the best way to test is just to push apart the soil or the mulch a little bit and then have a look at what's going on underneath. I can see here there is just too much moisture in this bed here, and I'm putting that back to me in my well-designed garden down the slope here, which kind of catches the water in the different swales that I have. So I shouldn't technically need to water this patch as much as I have been. So this is something that I noticed the other day when I was doing my kind of maintenance walk. So I'm not going to water this for a while. I'm going to let it dry out, and even not watering this for a few days, I have seen them kind of perk back up a little bit. They definitely need to grow stronger stalks, and they will do that by getting a lot less water than they're already getting. While we're in this area of the garden, I'll move on to my next point, which is having a look at how much soil life is below the surface. This is something definitely that you'll want to monitor, particularly if you are trying to increase either nitrogen levels or organic matter in your soil. A really good indicator that you're doing well is that you have a lot of activity in your soil. So for this area here where it is moist around the garlic, when I brush the mulch away, I can see so many worms in this mixture here, which is probably due to the fact that we added a lot of manure and compost to this area, which is fantastic to see the worms breaking it down. But then in other areas, I have noticed I haven't seen a lot of soil life at all, which indicates to me that I need to add either a little bit more water to the area or some organic matter so that microbes and worms and fungi have something to actually feed off, which then in turn your plants feed off as well. So having a look at soil is just super important, and making sure that you do have activity and things moving within there is a really, really great sign and something that you should be checking in your garden every now and then. The next thing that is great to regularly check up on is the colour of the leaves of the plants. Now this is going to totally depend on the type of plant, the stage of life of that particular plant, whether it's, losing its leaves or not. So a general understanding of what happens to that plant is a great thing to have in the garden, because it allows you to understand and pick up on things when it goes wrong. So unfortunately, I have a few examples to show you in my garden right now. One of which is these capsicum plants that I'm sitting next to at the moment. A lot of the capsicums and chilies around me are getting some pretty funky colours on their leaves. This is one here, for example. So I'm getting a little bit of a yellowing tinge to a lot of the leaves, and this is something that I picked up on a few weeks ago and had a look online about what it might be. It could be a few different things, but I've actually put it down to just the temperature overnight. We've been getting pretty cold temperatures, and yellowing leaves on capsicum, this is a typical example of when it's just too cold and the plant wants to lose its leaves. Because it's happening all over the plant, not kind of gradual different stages, it's happening where I would expect cold weather to impact a plant. Fingers crossed I'm putting it down to that. But having colours like this could also indicate that you have an iron or a nitrogen deficiency, or really a lot of different types of NPK deficiencies, so whether that's nitrogen, potassium or phosphorus. And that's where doing a soil test and a pH test is really great, because then you can start to see what kind of pH your soil is at and whether or not that plant can uptake as many nutrients as it can at that particular pH. Dealing with a problem like this, I don't really have much that I can do. I've just got to wait until the warmer weather, and luckily I've never had a problem with capsicums coming back when it starts to get a bit warmer. It's just the fact that we have pretty cold nights here and then warmer days. The plant is just really confused at what it's doing, but thankfully it's still producing a lot of fruit, so it should be fine for spring and summer. Other things that you can look out for of the colours of your leaves is crispy brown tips here, which usually indicates that you're not watering the plant enough, or it's not getting a regular supply of moisture. And just overall yellowing on plants can indicate, as I said, just multiple different deficiencies, a lot of the time due to changes in moisture levels as well. And that's just where understanding your environment and your surroundings is super valuable and important, because you can start to get to know your plants a little bit more and see what they do and don't like with your climate that you're in. Right, next on the list is just making sure that your plants are well pruned and have great airflow. This is particularly important in spring and summer months when it's a lot more humid and warmer. Plants are growing really crazily, particularly things like pumpkins and zucchinis and tomatoes, and they're more susceptible to things like powdery mildew and some other diseases if they don't have airflow throughout the plant. At the moment, I don't really have that challenge with my plants, just because I don't have a lot of plants that require heavy pruning. But even things just like my broccoli, some greens that I have, I like to just keep an eye on them just to make sure that they do have enough room to grow around, and that I'm not kind of constricting their growth by planting them too close to other plants. So just having a general checkup to see if your plants are overtaking any others, unless you're kind of like me and let your garden go some of the time, is a good thing to keep an eye on. All right, another thing you'll want to have a regular look at, and every gardener has these in their garden, and that is where your weeds are located. Being an organic gardener, I don't spray any of the weeds. I like to fix the problem as to why the weeds are there in the first place and understand the different soil properties, because generally poor soil leads to an increase in weed populations. So around my garden, I typically have a few different invasive species at the very ends of my beds, and that's where something called edge effects come into play, where generally at the very edge you're either getting a pool of nutrients or moisture. A typical example of this is on the side of roads. You'll typically see quite a lot of weeds or grasses, and I'm not really too worried about those. It's more if those weeds encroach into my garden beds, then I generally know I've got a little bit of a problem. This can be things such as an overabundance of nitrogen in a particular area, or it can be something as simple as too much water or not enough water in an area that weeds tend to like, or just an overall imbalance in the nutrient levels in your soil. For me personally here, weeds will typically grow in areas that have poor soil, and that's where I need to then put my focus. I can see behind me now I have quite a lot, which is not fantastic. I need to redo this bed before I plant my flower patch in here. but it's telling me that I probably need to add some more nutrients and fertilizers to this area, and organic matter as well. The less weeds you have, generally the stronger your plants will be, because they are the ones uptaking that nutrients rather than the weeds in the area. So just kind of getting an overall understanding of where the weeds are in your garden and why they might be there is really valuable for a healthy garden. Another thing I like to check up on in the garden pretty much every week or every second week is the root structure of some of my plants. Now, weeds are a great example of where you can understand what's happening below the surface, because a lot of the times I just pull the weeds out of the soil. If they're really easy to pull out and the soil crumbles away from the roots, then I know that that soil is probably a little bit better than areas where I am tugging at the weed to get out of the soil and it's really kind of binded to the underground soil. Then I know it's probably quite compacted and that area has a little bit more work to do by adding organic matter or something like gypsum to the soil. So I have a weed next to me here. I'm going to pull it out and see what the soil looks like underneath. And this is just a great way, again, to understand your soil, understand what's happening, and whether or not the root structure is really well developed and you've got a larger root ball. The larger the better, usually, rather than just kind of one or two main kind of roots depending on the different type of root structure. So when you're pulling it out, generally the larger the root structure and the more complex the better. Obviously, depending on what type of plant you're pulling. If it's carrots, it's obviously going to be a lot different to something like broccoli. If you're unsure what it should look like, it's as simple as a Google. Google has a lot of information on healthy plants, and just as simple as typing something in as what does healthy roots look like for broccoli or carrots or whatever plant you're looking at. And yes, I also have massive radishes in here that I'm just letting go for the seeds and green manure. And I'm just going to pull this one out here. It was a little hard to pull out. I broke it, which is an indicator of that. But overall, I think the root structure on this plant here is pretty good. It's got some main roots going down. But overall, you can see that this root structure has, it's pretty complex for a small plant. It's got a few main roots going down and then some that are coming sideways as well, with a lot of different sizes of roots. This is probably something that I'm looking for. So overall, this weed was a quite healthy weed, but unfortunately its home is no longer in the garden bed next to my leeks. And then the last tip, the 7th tip on this list, is to observe the sun patterns and what your garden looks like at different times of the day. This is going to change throughout the year, so every few weeks it's good to come out and even just do a day of observation by recording where the sun is in the morning, at lunchtime and in the afternoon as well, and you'll start to get a really good understanding of where there is shade and where there is direct sunlight. This is good to understand because some areas of the garden might need a little bit more water than other areas depending on how much direct sunlight they get. I know for the garlic in the other bed that I showed you earlier in this video requires a lot less water because it gets a lot more shade than the garlic does behind me. As you can see, this is still kind of getting some full sun, but the other patch is getting that dappled shade right now. So understanding the sun and where it is positioned throughout the day is really key to maintaining a healthy garden. So those are all of the things that I generally do every week or every 2 weeks. They're not things that take a long time at all, and they really do pay off in the long term to make sure that all my plants are healthy and that my garden can thrive. Obviously along the way, it's not perfect and I have a lot of failures in the garden, but maintaining all of these different steps is something that is definitely going to be beneficial. So let me know in the comments if I have missed any, and some things that you do in your garden to make sure that all of your plants are healthy and that you can maintain really strong and nutritious plants. And make sure to subscribe for lots more garden videos. Thank you so much for watching, and until my next one, happy gardening everyone. Bye.